Do you love crocheting toys but hate the part when it comes to sewing them together? It's one of the things that I get asked about the most by people who are making my patterns, is for little bits of advice on that final joining phase. And it's something that's kind of hard to describe within a pattern using just your words, is exactly how I do it. So I thought today what I would do was run through with you an active example that I've got at the moment. She's in several bits, it's a crochet doll, and I will film the process as I sew her together. We'll talk through what I do. I will share some tips and tricks and some do's and don'ts for you. Hopefully it'll stand you in good stead for when you have to join your next crochet toy pattern together. Now, there are lots of different ways of sewing limbs and heads and bodies together in crochet toys, and it's not a case of a right or a wrong. I'm just going to show you how I do it. I'm not a sewer, a sewist, I'm a crocheter, so forgive me if I use some incorrect sewing terminology as we work along, but I'm going to do my best and hopefully it'll be nice and clear for you how I find it effective to sew toys together. So a decade ago, when I was designing and making crochet toys, I felt like I'd sewn them very securely when I'd finished. And in fact, what I found over the years is that occasionally limbs will come loose and come off, and you know, the actual integrity of the crochet stitches were there, but the sewing, the joining together, left a little bit more to be desired. So over time I've put together various ways that I have helped to keep those limbs a bit more securely in place, and now I have a lot less delimbings than I used to do at the beginning. So I'm pretty confident that, that you'll find these helpful if you've had the same sort of loose attachment issues in the past. Firstly, do follow the instructions. If a pattern that you're following gives sewing instructions, like written ones or a link to a video with them, follow them. The person who's made that pattern, they know best how to attach their own toy together. So just check to make sure, if it says next sew the leg on, just read down a couple of lines and just make sure it doesn't give you sort of some additional information on how exactly to do that. Stuff for the sewing. Let me explain. When I've got a limb, I'm going to be thinking about, when I'm stuffing it, how it's going to be attached. Do I want it to be flat to the toy? Do I want it to have a curved shape? Stuff sympathetically for how you want the toy to lie. So for example, if the limbs are coming out to the sides, you want to have them completely filled all the way to the end of the final round with stuffing. But if they're going to lie flat, look at how you put the padding in that will allow it to sit against the toy. Consider the posture and position. I know, it sounds obvious, but honestly, we've all been there several times. You know, you attach your legs so they're standing up and you were like, oh no, I wanted it to be sitting down. So just think to yourself before you start, how is this toy going to be positioned? Are they going to be nice and upright, in which case you want to go around the tops and join them on directly? Are we going to have it sitting? And if so, are the legs going to stick out underneath the body, or are they going to sit to the side of the body? Be really confident in how you want that final position to be before you have sewn anything at all. Once you are confident with your position, pin it there. Now you can pin it with actual pins, or you can use safety pins or stitch markers to get an even firmer join to the right place. The downside of pins is that if you've got a particularly padded limb, the pins sometimes pop out once you start sewing. So if you want that extra level of security, use safety pins or stitch markers just to really secure that in place. It saves a bit of drama as you go down the line. So pin first. You've got the position right, now pin it in place. Make sure you are 100% happy with where that pinned limb is. Look at it from all angles before you then start tacking. Now to me, tacking means like sew it loosely as an initial thing. I don't know if that's the correct technical term, so apologies to sewers. If it's not, please correct me in the comments section below. But once you've got it pinned in place, I want you to then go through and make big weaving stitches loosely in and out, just to hold it in that correct position. those tacked stitches should be further in than your final layer of stitches are going to be. So if you want around the edge of the thigh to be the point where there's going to be an obvious join, you're going to make your initial join 1 or 2 rounds inwards of that in order to loosely keep it in place for those final ones. And that's because as you pull out those pins or safety pins that you've been using to hold it in place, things can shift. So again, it gives you that little bit of leeway for making sure the positioning is just right. So now you're going to do your final level of sewing. What I do is go in and out of every single stitch of that round that I'm going around, and it may not be in the shape of a round. You want it to be in the shape of the position where you want the leg to sit. So I go in and out of every single individual 1 stitch size, and I pull it nice and tight after every one. You can go through just 1 loop of the stitch if you prefer, but personally for me, I like a more secure setting for my limbs. So what I will do is I will go all the way through and outside, and you might catch some of the padding within that as well. That is fine as long as it doesn't pull through with the stitch. If it does, just reverse that one and just poke it back in again with a needle. So your stitches are going to be tight and they're going to be close together. Go around that final fixing point twice. Do be careful that you use a thin enough needle that it's not going to distort the shapes of the stitches. So you want to have a needle that is big enough for the yarn to fit through, but small enough that it's not going to distort the stitches. I have got a huge range of sizes of needles. I always use the thinnest one that I can for the job. If it's fiddly, use a tapestry needle instead, one of those ones that's got a bend off to the side. I have in fact also got a manually bent regular needle that does the same job. You know, be careful when you bend metal because obviously it can snap if you're not too careful. But tapestry needle, a bent one, for working in and out of fiddly stitches, that works better. Do use a metal needle rather than a plastic one if you can. The problem with plastic is it's just more likely to have slightly abrasive edges or burrs where the plastic was cast. So for that smoothest possible finish, do use a steel needle. Don't scrimp on the yarn. Make sure you have a big yarn tail. I would say obviously it's going to be relative to the area that you're sewing on, but maybe a couple of feet of yarn tail. Yes, it's going to be slightly more fiddly pulling it through, but having this big long tail of yarn means that you don't need to scrimp when you're going around the edge. So you can go around as many times as you feel that you need to secure it. It also means that you've got a really big yarn tail to hide inside the body of the toy, so if things do go wrong later on, much more easy to then repair your work with the exact correct colour of yarn. And finally, don't be afraid to start again. It is deeply frustrating undoing particularly hand sewing, but don't worry, if it doesn't look right and you're not happy, then you're probably never going to be happy with it. Unpick it and try again. I also really highly recommend practicing this as well. You can practice sewing crochet together by sewing a couple of old sample granny squares or anything like that. Just practice the feel of going in and out and making those nice tight stitches. Remember as well that it's really important to colour match the yarn that you're using and to take into account how secure you want this join to be. For me, most of my patterns are done in either an acrylic yarn or a cotton blend yarn, and it's fine to use the same yarn that you used for the toy to sew them together. However, if you are making something with plush yarn that has a very thin fibre through the middle and a propensity for sort of snapping, I would then use personally a different type of yarn for sewing it together. So still important to colour match, even though hopefully it will be hidden within the sort of chenille fibres. So do still colour match, but I would in that case use a different yarn to join than you did to make the pattern up, because then you'll feel more secure that it's not likely to snap with that little thin fibre in the middle. Anyway, I hope that's been useful. I'd love to hear what you think. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else you'd use or do when you're joining your toys together? Do let me know and I'll see you in the comments section below. Happy crocheting.